Welcome back to Seek First Podcast. Coach Dan, and I'm here with a good friend and client, Kimberly Steffens. And I invited Kim in because we want to share stories. And Kim has an awesome story. And I've been blessed enough to have been a part of that story for about 2 years now, little over.
Yep.
And so, who are you? And I would say, what, from your perspective, ultimately brought us together, and just tell your story a little bit.
Yeah. It's been about 2 years. And I brought my kids originally to your gym to do a summer program. And I remember walking in with my youngest and thinking, oh, yeah, this is just for my kids, right? And leaving and couldn't get this gnawing thought out of my head that I needed to do something for myself to improve my health based on the things I was hearing.
Yeah, and I don't even hardly remember the conversation. I remember how I felt during the conversation, and I remember at some point in the conversation, it shifted towards a conversation regarding your health. Mm-hmm. Because at the time, you weren't healthy.
No.
So where were you? So you came in to get Kyle and Carson, her two kids, her two boys, into our summer youth program.
Yep.
Kyle's in it again this summer. And we'll probably talk more about Kyle later. He's a big part of this story, right? Ultimately. Yeah. And you and I ended up connecting. We ended up having a conversation about your health and wellness, about our philosophy, my philosophy on overall health. And I presented you. Was it that conversation? Or did...
I think it was related to the health of the kids, but that isn't what I heard.
Sure.
Right? I heard more about health and wellness in general. And in my head, I was in this headspace of already trying to do some things to improve my health. And so I was like, oh, that's for me. That's for me. It just was speaking to me. And to me, it was a God thing.
Yeah.
Because I had really been diving into the Bible and diving into how do I improve my life? How do I move forward even prior to meeting you and coming here? And so it was
It's weird you put this... It's weird that you put this crazy dude talking about spiritual and mental well-being,
right.
Wrapped in physical health. So we talked, whether it was that time or another time, we probably met a couple times because that's usually what it takes. But ultimately, you were in a pretty bad place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinking back to that, I was, even a couple years prior to that, I had a fall down the stairs. I was barely walking for, a year and a half from having 5 herniated discs. And so physically I wasn't doing well, but mentally, spiritually, the spiritual part was improving. That's kind of where I started. I knew from my growing up that going back to God was helpful. Mm-hmm. And so I started there. But yeah, physically I was, 100 pounds overweight, mentally struggling, anxiety, didn't like who I was.
Everything kind of felt out of control.
Yeah. Family. Yep. I've been blessed to have a husband who's always been supportive. So, that was going pretty well. But, family-wise, we felt out of control with the kids and parenting and kind of everything.
Right.
Yeah. My job, I felt like that was going well. And I had some control there because I work as a nurse and I feel like I'm pretty good at that.
And just for the record, you're in palliative care.
Yeah.
So, your job is very meaningful. Mm-hmm. It's very intense.
Yep.
It's very deep and purpose-driven because you're dealing with the real reality of life.
Yeah.
Which is death.
Right.
There isn't a more significant truth and reality than that.
Right.
And so I don't want to get on too many rabbit holes because I feel like we could talk about a lot of different aspects regarding this because that's certainly something I coach a lot about.
Yep.
And we have a lot of conversations about that reality because that's something everyone
Right.
has to face. But in your experience as a palliative care nurse, how many people do you care for that just seem obliviously caught off guard by the reality of the impermanence of life?
Oh, a majority.
Yeah.
A majority of people that I see. You
Right.
know, I think it's scary to hear that someone like me would walk in and, you know, ask them to talk about that subject.
Right.
And to walk in and try to explain, yeah, you're nearing end of life. And so it's everything. It's wrapped up into their physical health, their mental health, their spiritual health. And we touch on all those things. And so, yeah, it's a big thing. But most people want to avoid it.
Right. Right. Or have been avoiding it
Yeah.
their whole life. So
Yeah.
they want to continue avoiding it.
Right.
Out of my own curiosity, from a broad anecdotal survey, how many people that seem to be avoiding it, have avoided it, blocked it out, and are continuing to avoid it, how many of them would you classify as healthy people?
Ooh,
I know.
that's
Kind of a broad question, but
Yeah.
it's a good question.
I would say most of the people I meet are unhealthy in many ways.
Sure, and
You know,
I mean that
yeah.
kind of goes with the
And
territory,
at the
right?
point I'm meeting
Right.
them, of course, they're in this serious or chronic
Right.
health,
course.
disease process. Most of them have multiple comorbidities, like
Right.
they're very ill.
Yep.
But even prior to that,
Right.
you can see their history
You know
as you
the
get to know
pattern.
them. Yeah.
Well, when you don't get to a comorbid state without a chronic pattern
Mm-hmm.
of dis-ease and unhealthy decision making,
Right.
that is the pattern, right? That's how you got there,
Right.
right?
Right.
So you had a pattern.
Mhm.
Can you say like what your coping mechanisms?
Eating.
Eating, right?
I wasn't a drinker. I never smoked, all the things. But yeah, it was anxiety when things of life happened, just eating too much
Yep.
in general.
Yeah,
There wasn't a specific thing, but just,
it was
Yeah.
just your go-to
Yeah.
as a comfort.
yep.
Did you combine that with entertainment, social media, scrolling,
Yeah.
that kind of distractive
Occasionally.
dopamine? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say doing the fun things, like trying to find something else, buying things.
Yep.
Buying things.
That's
that
a
was
big one.
thing. Shopping.
That's one I always forget to
Yep.
mention. And now you just helped me with my webinar coming up on the 25th of July, because people are going to kick back at the investment into self, because I'm asking for a reasonable but yet significant investment.
Yep.
And you took the plunge, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't an easy thing to do.
No.
But you
Yeah.
obviously understand why I do it,
Yep.
because I need you committed.
Right.
But that's a really good point, is how many people in that same position are spending over the course of a few years quadruple or double or at least
Yeah.
what I'm charging just on that
Yeah.
consumerism,
Yeah.
because that is a big one.
It's a big one.
It's a big one.
That's actually, if I think about that, that's a huge thing.
Yes.
It was, I had to have the house. I had to have the car. I had to have, the
A
clothes,
knick-knack.
like the,
Yeah.
I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the cigarettes and alcohol for me.
Right.
So it looked pretty.
Right.
It looked
Right.
real pretty on the outside,
Right.
except for
Yeah.
my weight maybe. But, other than that, like people would tell me, oh, you got it all together. And I'm going,
Right.
man, I don't have it all together.
At
all.
So Isaiah just left. He's my Seek First coaching partner. And he just met with a friend, and he was kind of alluding to the fact that it seemed like he had it all together.
Yep.
Right? And we just had a conversation literally regarding our culture's propensity to just say that, to make it seem
For
all
sure.
the time. I mean, it's not just our culture, but our culture in particular has a high demand on our ability to make ourselves perceived as together.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, unfortunately, in a capitalistic culture is with our brands, our materials, our stuff, our home, our all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's one that when I'm listing off all the coping mechanisms, I always forget about that one. That's a huge one.
Yeah, I don't think we've talked about that a whole lot.
No.
You know,
I always forget about that one.
But I do think about that, and I'm like, when you ask that broader question, I'm like, well, yeah, food, but what else? Because I don't go to the things that a lot of people go to. Like alcohol's never been a big thing, all of those. But yeah, I would just go shop and buy meaningless things.
So not to become a coach, but out of curiosity, and I am one, so can't help it. How much money over the last 5 years do you think you've wasted, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big one. Goodness. I mean, cars, we've traded out cars several times.
So tens of thousands.
For sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So tens of thousands. Hopefully that resonates with some of the people that watch this, because I know that's a big one. Sarah's mom, my wife's mother, you know, she had a horrible end of life and struggle. And, you know, we're still finding unopened Amazon boxes all over her house. And that was one of her coping mechanisms, being able to search through and get the dopamine hit by getting something, right? Receiving something, having something to look forward to that, you know, gives you that little sense of...
Well, it's interesting, too, thinking about that, because we have the cheapest cars now we've ever probably had.
Right.
And I'm probably the happiest I've ever been. So there's that.
Right, for sure. Well, and again, we could go down a lot of rabbit holes because, you know, obviously you've changed the way you're thinking a lot. And I'd like to get more into the, well, what were you most scared of when you decided to ultimately start coaching with me?
Yeah. Maybe that I'd fail at it.
Yep.
That I wouldn't be able to keep it up long term.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I think I learned over time more than just the fear of failure was not knowing who I was, I guess. Over time, I started learning that.
Right.
I guess. But that wasn't my initial fear. My initial fear was that I wouldn't do well at it.
Sure.
And then I would fall off the bandwagon, basically. Yeah.
So what is it, do you think, that made the difference? Because I assume I'm not the first person who you've exercised or dieted with.
No. I've had probably 3 or 4 trainers through my life. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is, would it be fair to say this is your first coaching experience?
Yeah, because I think the focus before has been on physical training with maybe a little nutrition.
Yes, right. And that's pretty standard, right? I mean, that's the whole message behind Seek First Coaching is we want to stop treating those symptoms. And now you recognize exercise and diet as symptomatic.
Right.
Because we just discussed the issue. The issue was negative emotion. The issue was lack of control in your life. And then you just touched on something profound, which was, I didn't know who I was. Again, I'm trying to not go down a rabbit hole here, because we could talk for an hour on the proclivity of people in this culture to self-define who they are. Is it fair to say that that's what you were doing? Or telling yourself to some degree? Or, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely define myself by the culture standards.
Right.
For
what you had,
most of my life.
What your car looked like, what your house looked like, how your job was, how your marriage was. Some of those more important than others.
Yeah.
But it's fair to say that you weren't seeing yourself through the truthful lens of God's eyes regarding who you are, who He intended you to be, and getting out of the way to let that definition
Yeah.
come forward.
That
versus
changed everything.
That changed everything.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those results.
Yeah.
Okay. Because one of the things, again, in the coaching thing that I say is I literally don't worry about weight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we measured,
Mm-hmm.
we weighed,
Mm-hmm.
we took all the body fat.
Yeah.
We want those physical changes
Mm-hmm.
to be reflective of the forward momentum you're making
Right.
and the real change.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, if you get this part right,
Mm-hmm.
the weight just falls
It just
off.
follows.
It just follows.
Yeah.
So let's just start with weight.
Yep.
How much did you lose?
90 pounds total.
90 pounds in about a year.
Yep.
Little
Year and a half. Yep.
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 Okay. And your first 90 days was like 30, right?
32, something like
32,
that.
something like that.
Yeah.
And like you're my average client.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So the average 30 day or 90 days, 32 pounds. And the average 12 month right now is 86. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
So what else changed?
I started knowing who I was. I mean, for me, was a huge thing of trusting more in God and looking for that, because that, as I went through this process, I realized that I didn't really know who I was in terms of who God says I am, because I would look at myself and kind of just put myself down. So
Yep.
a lot of my battle was internal.
Of course.
And things people didn't see, where it was like, oh, I don't like who I am. I would tell myself I was terrible. The things I said to myself were terrible. And so over time, I think realizing who I was made it easier to not have that negative self-talk, and ultimately then propelled me forward in a healthy way,
So you let go of the self-definition and submit it to his definition.
Yeah.
I remember many of our talks, and this is very common with my female clients, is, and the men in my program, we joke about this all the time, right? Your husband and I,
Yeah.
we joke about this all the time. It's like, oh my God, they're like, I always say, no woman has ever defined a man as beautiful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet we see you guys in the most, beauty is a definition that is reserved for creation, for nature, for sunsets, for the divine.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we associate that level of beauty with our wives, with the females in general.
Mm-hmm.
And yet one of the fascinating aspects of that male-female dichotomy is that you guys never see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we talked about that a lot, in that you just could not see yourself as a beautiful person.
Right.
How do you feel about that now?
It's better.
Right.
I mean, I still
Sure.
struggle.
Oh, I would imagine.
I still have
That's
days.
because you're fat. You're still you're still not perfect.
Right.
You still sin.
Yeah.
You still screw up. I almost swore.
Yeah.
You still you still do all those things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Here's a better question. Have you had any moments where you have seen yourself as a beautiful person?
Yeah. Yeah. I think more because I can look at it through God's lens.
Right.
That He made me to
Right.
be here for a purpose,
Yeah.
for a reason.
Yeah.
And if I don't look at it that way, I'm looking at God going, I don't trust what you did,
For sure.
And I have to remind myself of that, though.
Yeah.
And there are days that I have to remind myself a lot.
For sure. For sure. Well, and I mean, we also find beauty relative to our proper forward movement at any point in time, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, whatever. Sometimes I'll say, it's quite simple actually at the end of the day. You have a metaphorical scale in your mind, and on one side are the things you know you should be doing, and one thing is the thing you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And which side you feed is going to directly correlate to the way you see yourself. And so we have some really traditionally beautiful young women in our club right now. Well, maybe right now, but
Sure.
certainly now generally, that if I were to invite in all the 45-year-old moms, they would look at her and say, oh my gosh, that's what I want to be like.
Yep.
And I will show you a young woman that, well, we see that, she sees something completely different based on that equation,
Right.
based on the pizza versus the fruit, or the, the technology versus the Bible, or whatever the equation is, right?
Yeah.
The selfishness versus the selflessness, whatever that equation is, she's going to look in the mirror and she's going to see something totally different than what we see,
Right.
Right. So what other changes, like when you look back at that time, I know I have a couple things that are still vaguely standout-ish. What are a few things that stand out to you regarding your journey and some of the results or breakthroughs that came along for that ride?
Yeah, I think serving others, that came out of a process of changing my daily habits and essentially of waking up in the morning and starting my day out by reading the Bible, praying, just having quiet time. I used to just never just let myself
just roll into it.
Yeah. And I would wake up with a bang and just start my day however I felt like it. And, I kind of aimlessly went throughout my day, honestly, before.
Yeah.
And so over time, I started learning how to, just get in the Word and meditate and pray and start my day out in a way that I was honoring God. And then I brought that with me throughout the day instead of just walking through the day. And so it became that everything I did, what I put in my mouth, what I said to people became more about what God had than what I wanted.
Right.
And now I'm not perfect at that by any means, but that's how I live my life now. And little by little, that improved to a point that, I felt like I was just moving in the right direction and following more what God had for me because I started my day out right.
Would it be fair to say you recognized that your future and best self was someone that you were responsible for caring about, serving as well?
Right.
And and by definition, that is in alignment with what God's intended purpose for you is.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we really dove in on that.
Yes.
So that time you took in the morning was about proper vision and aim, and then getting yourself aligned by submitting to what you knew he wanted for you.
Right.
And ultimately what you want for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what we all want for ourselves.
Yeah.
That we just seem incapable of getting out of our own way to provide ourselves.
Right.
I remember maybe about 5 or 6 months in, you were going to give a talk. What was that about? Was that at church?
It was at church.
Was it at like a woman's thing, or was it?
Yeah, it was a women's event, and I was talking about my story, essentially sharing my testimony. And so some of it had to do with
and there was past trauma that was built.
Yeah.
And wasn't your fear, I believe if I remember right, was God was telling you to bring your mom and your sisters and the people closest to you into this story.
Yep.
But your fear was
they would judge me for what I had to share.
Or
be,
or feel bad themselves.
Yeah.
Because they weren't aware of it.
Right.
And I remember
I hadn't shared a lot of the things with, the traumas that I'd been through. Because I grew up pretty well, honestly. Like my parents were, good parents and, we had our things. But in general, people would say, oh yeah, you had a good family. My parents were still married, all the things. But I had some things happen in high school with traumas with a boyfriend and, being physically abusive, sexually abused, and so that stuff I hadn't fully shared with my family.
It's huge.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Scary.
Right.
I mean, more because, I think more about me. It was more my
Of
fear
course.
than anything of how they were going to react. At the
Right.
time, I think I thought it was how they were going to react.
Oh, yeah.
But
It's all coming back to me.
yeah, it was all, just feeling like, oh, I hadn't really shared that piece of my story, I guess. And I don't think I realized how much it affected me, to be fair, up until
Yes.
later on in my life.
Correct.
And so that for me became this thing that I had to work through,
Mm-hmm.
that once I worked through it, I was like, oh man, huge weight off my shoulders.
Huge. Yep. And the only way out is through.
Right.
And that's what we do,
Yep.
right? Is we
Yeah.
stand with you in front of that
Mm-hmm.
with love, courage,
Yeah.
right? Non-judgment.
Yeah.
And say, okay, let's look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
what are the necessary steps you have to take to both learn, integrate, and overcome
Mm-hmm.
versus continuing to subconsciously and emotionally let this perceived trauma, and I'm using my words carefully
Mm-hmm.
because you wouldn't be who you are now without this.
Right. Right. That's what I learned too.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Because I think for the longest time it was like,
You were letting it define you to some degree.
to some degree.
To
yeah.
some degree.
Yep.
I try to visualize, help people visualize every one of their perceived traumas as a frame that starts wide,
Mm-hmm.
and then every trauma gets narrower and smaller and smaller and smaller
Yep.
until you're boxed into this
Mm-hmm.
idea of who you are with a convenient
Yeah.
scapegoat and reason
Right.
all the way from this particular one
Mm-hmm.
to, you name it,
Mm-hmm.
a fight with your husband or something he did.
Yeah, you kind of draw it into everything
correct,
you do.
you draw
yeah.
it into everything you do.
Yeah.
And so how did your family take that?
It went really well. My mom watched it later, so they actually couldn't come
That's
the
right.
night that I spoke.
right.
But my mom watched it later, and honestly, I think she was like, "Oh, I didn't know."
Right.
So I think she felt bad that she didn't know.
Sure.
But really, it was met with love and
Yeah. And everything
not
was
what I expected.
and something that you could then at that point let go of because it wasn't
Yeah.
defining you anymore.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing that I shared that night was about, I guess, just my growing up wasn't so much about my family, but, I grew up, I would say, overweight. My perception of myself is that I was very overweight and was teased a lot. And so I was working through this kind of just
Right.
trauma from that.
Right.
That defined, and then I'm 5'11", I'm a
Yeah,
taller female.
yeah.
Like I had all these things that were like, and now I'm like, that's fine. That's who I am. But back then
Of course.
it was like,
And
it's
nothing creates insecurity better than middle school.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. So a lot of that was part of my story too, of how,
Yep.
again, who are you? Am I the girl who got teased all the time? And am I listening to what those voices were telling me, or am I listening to God's voice?
Right.
And so,
We all have a choice.
yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned your son.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that can't be understated, and you know this, because you have friends now that have gone through this program,
Mm-hmm.
and you've seen how true transformational health doesn't just manifest on the scale.
Right.
I'm going to get emotional because this stuff is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the ripple effect that your transformational health has had on your family and on your marriage
Yeah.
and on your mission.
A lot. Ooh.
So go nuts. So I don't want to talk anymore.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Where do I start with that? But I guess Kyle's story
Yep.
is that since he was young, we felt like something was maybe different, or, it was a struggle in parenting in a lot of ways. And so we were trying to do our best to help him through, feeling like we weren't getting answers a lot of times. And then that translated to, or turned into, like, 6th grade. He started really struggling at the school he was at, and just some things were happening that were like, we can't have you in this environment. He was diagnosed when he was 7 with autism, kind of more of an emotional, sensory type autism.
But fairly light.
Yeah, he's very high functioning.
Yeah, but
But yeah, it really affected him in terms of how he learned and how maybe he responds to other people. He doesn't, his perspective is maybe different than what our world would define as normal.
Yep.
And then he also was diagnosed with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder. So, in the schools we were at, that was a big thing they would say, do this to get him the help that he needs. And we were cautious because I always want to, kind of be in the middle and say, well, I don't want this to define who he is, but so he had the diagnosis. He had been on all different medications for the ADHD for many years. And then once I started my transformation, I just realized that in a way, less was more in terms of the medication piece. So we slowly started getting him off of that, but that didn't happen until we just eventually took him off of screens for 3 months.
Yeah.
We did it for our whole family, not just Kyle, because his behaviors had gotten to a point where life was being on a screen. It was, I either eat or I'm on a screen.
Yeah.
And so
we went through that with you as well.
Yeah.
And that was traumatic.
Yeah.
Both good and bad.
Right.
Bad first.
It was
because
hard.
Technology is an addiction.
Yeah.
Like everything else.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that screen time became a way for you and Brian to cope with some of Kyle's behaviors? Not entirely, but as a break.
For sure.
As a break.
And
I just can't take the intensity, the frustration in the back of your head.
And it was the only thing he enjoyed, too.
Right. But the downside of that being an ADHD brain, that's like giving an alcoholic whiskey and saying, here, don't be an alcoholic anymore, right? Because he's getting the stimuli that an ADHD brain needs, but he's not learning how to deal without the stimuli.
Right.
And that was the part that you guys ultimately, with the detox, decided, let's deal with this properly.
Yeah.
And so
and the hardest thing of that process was, one, just making the decision to do it and be all in.
All in. All 3 of you, or 4 of you.
All of us had to do it. Like, we had to say, I'm not going to be on screens either because I love you enough that I'm going to do this with you.
Yeah, you got to take it for the team.
Yeah, and so that was hard.
I know it was harder for Brian, I think. But,
I think it was hard for me, too.
Sure.
I think it was hard for all of us. But the day I remember the most was walking downstairs. We had just a mattress in the basement that the kids would play on. And I think we were like 3-4 days in of no screens. And Kyle was down there shaking, crying, sweating.
Like a heroin addict.
Yes. And I remember.
The grip that it had on him was, I remember that too. I didn't see it, but I remember
sharing about it because I was like, what do I do?
You were scared. Rightfully so.
And I, as a nurse, have detoxed people, like in the hospital.
Right.
And I looked at him and I just was like, oh my goodness.
The amount of strength that it requires to go through something like that.
Yeah.
Knowing that in some way you had a hand in it on top of it.
Yeah. A little guilty.
Well, and this is what's so hard is like the punishment for doing the right thing later is going to be directly proportionate to the amount of time you avoided doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so the punishment usually fits the crime.
Right.
And that was tough. I remember that. I remember it.
Yeah. It was like all the things you feel as a mom or all the mom guilt. And you're like, oh my goodness.
And the temptation to give in.
And yes, I was like, like I knew, I knew that if I gave him the screens, because that's what he kept asking me for. Yeah. I'm like, no, we're not going to do that, buddy. Even to the point that he looked at me and said, I might as well not live.
Right. Crazy.
And when I heard that, I remember walking out of the room. Yeah. Because I think at that point, I was just like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
What do you do with that? And like, are there places that do this? Are there places that help with this? And there aren't. I mean,
Sarah and I joke all the time. We're like, we don't joke because it's not funny. Right. It's blackly funny, but we're like, we're going to end up being a technology detox center, on the side. And, you had learned about our family, our homeschooling. Mm-hmm. We're old school. We have a 16 and 14-year-old. Mm-hmm. They now have phones, but both of them just got them.
Yeah.
And they're on lockdown. Right. Yeah. And we don't have video games. I think we have an Xbox 360.
Yep.
But we're not really a game, Mm-hmm. And they just grew up old school.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And video games are so powerful.
Yeah.
Right? But they take away from... What did I post? I heard this somewhere. Video games are entertainment that's divorced from the rough and tumble play that boys need from their fathers for that development with their peers.
Right.
But it's so much more powerful than the wrestling. The dopaminergical intensity of video games is so much more intriguing and addictive and powerful. So it's got such a huge grasp. But so that was the problem. You did the thing that most people know deep down they need to do, but don't.
Right.
And then what happened with Kyle? What happened over the last year?
Yeah.
Kyle.
He's a totally different kid in a great way.
He's
great way. Like, I would say most people that are seeing him again after 6 months to a year are like,
who is this?
He's a great kid. He is like funny and he has a personality.
He has better focus.
He has focus. And so we had left it open-ended, which for someone who's autistic, they want, when am I getting my screens back? Like they want a time. That's very much how his personality is. And we said, you choose by when you choose to show us that you have an interest aside from video games.
Yep.
You need something else outside of that. And so we were trying to teach him to like have a habit of getting into the Bible and have a habit of
working out.
Yeah. Moving his body, eating better, and focusing on little things at a time. We still have room to grow with that. But he eventually tried BMX. And of course, my skepticism was like, is he really going to like this? Like,
you want to tell the story?
Sure. Like, I was like, oh yeah, he's not gonna take on
Whose suggestion was that?
You and Sarah.
This is how you know Kim and I had grown close, because the eye rolls were in full effect the day Kyle got on the track for Braden's 16th birthday.
Yep.
And we got a bike on it. And I knew that Kyle would love it. And I knew that because I know how his brain works.
Yeah.
And I knew that BMX would be the real life video game version of a hobby and an activity that would help focus his mind on one thing and one thing only, which is the track, the race, the everything, because it's a dangerous sport. Yeah. It's intense.
Yeah.
Right? That day Brian crashed.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But I remember, I think I was standing somewhere and...
Well, you walked off the track and you had the biggest grin on your face. And I was like rolling my eyes at you.
Yes.
Like, yes, you're right. Yes, you were right.
She knows me. I struggle with ego, and I do still like to be right.
But I was happy to admit you were right, 100%, to be fair.
100%.
Because, my kid liked something.
Right.
That was
Yes.
amazing.
Right. And now he's racing state series.
I think
He's on
for his novice, he's like third or fourth.
in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's almost intermediate. He's got a few more
Yep.
wins that he needs to get.
Yep.
He's racing for what team?
He's been on the Mad Dog team.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he's on a team.
Yep.
He's on a team with racers. He started reading a ton.
Yeah. He actually
especially
loves
during
reading now.
Yes.
Mhm.
And then on he's in our youth program by his request.
Yeah. Yeah. And he tried out for the school play. He came home. This was like a month after starting BMX. And me as a mom, I was like, oh my goodness, we're doing a lot of things. But he came home and he's like, oh, Mom, I didn't really ask your permission for this, but I tried out for the school play. And I went, you did what? Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And he almost didn't want to tell me, which was interesting. I think he was growing and learning like who he was and what his interests were. And he wanted to try something new.
Yeah.
And he was really good at it, which is cool.
What was the feedback you got from his teachers?
Oh, yeah. So he started at a smaller private school in 7th grade and struggled really 7th grade year. I mean, I think he needed a lot of help. And so his teachers honestly struggled with him, right? And so 8th grade
And this was before the detox.
Before the detox.
With all the intense behaviors.
Yep. Yep. And so 8th grade was the year that we started all of this. And at this point, the beginning of that year, no medicine. He was off all of his medicines. And then we started that detox. I think it was end of September, beginning of October. In the midst of that, we had so many things. Like I had a concussion and all sorts, but a whole nother story. All the reasons to not do it, but we still did. But his teachers, by the end of the year, like they started to see the changes in probably January, February when BMX started.
Yep.
And this was after the electronic detox, and started seeing a change in him. And they're like, oh, he's talking more. He's more focused, and he still had a little bit of ups and downs. But by the end of the year, his teacher, I know. Was so cool.
It was so cool.
She admitted that they kind of drew straws for him. And she saw Kyle's name and wondered how it would go because of his behaviors. Yep. And so she told us that at the end of the year, and she said, he became such a blessing to me. She's like, he would laugh at all my jokes. And
I always knew Kyle would get my jokes.
Yeah. That's what she said.
Yeah.
And she's like, I looked forward to having him there every day. And he has grown so much. It just, listening to it, when I was sitting there in the audience listening to her talk, oh man.
Yeah.
I was like, all that
you
work
shared
was
the video and I could hear Brian laughing.
Mm-hmm.
I could barely watch the video.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't know how they're not just in tears right now.
Oh, I was bawling.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that was Kyle's story.
Yeah.
Your marriage.
Yeah.
Right?
That's improved a lot.
Yep. Brian and I are friends. We golf. We hang out. I coach him a little bit now. And but we don't have to touch on everything just for time's sake. Mm-hmm. But I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Takes a Village, right? Yeah. So one of the amazing things that happens when we get out of our own way and we start to listen and we start to pay attention properly, as we were always designed to do, and we stop making it about us, we start to see things and we start to be shown things that we think we've never seen before, but really we're blind to, is a better way of saying it.
Right.
And so at some point along the journey, probably about a year ago, roughly that same time, you were given a vision because you were going through some really, really tough stuff, which you're still going through with a precancerous pancreatic cyst that needs consistent monitoring, probably surgery, and the looming, overwhelming fear of just what pancreatic cancer brings, which can't be just pushed aside in this equation, even though,
Right.
God bless, it's preemptive, it's early, they're on it.
Yeah.
So lots of good things there.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at some point during the first wave of this realization and this process, you were given a gift, a vision.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. I think as most of us would, I sat in a space of praying a lot, because when you're in a space of wrestling with your own mortality, wondering what's next, you don't know.
Especially after you had just gone through this incredible transformation, got your life back, got your light turned back on,
and then you're told, oh, you might have pancreatic cancer. And I was like...
And then got T-boned.
Oh, man, yes. And then a few months after that, I got T-boned in a car accident. And I was just like, oh, my goodness, everything
Satan
feels
does
crazy.
not want you to be in this space.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, and I had taken on different leadership positions and, things at church, or, really stepped out of my comfort zone in so many ways.
Right.
And then all these things came up, and I was like, my gosh, what is going on right now? But it led me to prayer.
Right.
It led me to say, what do I have? Like, where am I at? I could talk to all the people, but it didn't always make me feel better, and so my prayer time became really important, especially once the concussion happened, because I couldn't get out of bed some of the days. They were telling me not to drive, you can't watch TV, you can't do all the things to make you feel better that you might go to.
Right.
And yeah, I had prayer and quiet time, a lot of it. And as I was praying, I just felt God telling me to get out of my own head, because I think I was initially told about the cyst in about April of that year.
And this year?
Last year.
Was it last year?
Yeah.
Already?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so then I went through that summer kind of not knowing what was going to happen, being told I'd have surgery. You weren't. I'm going to have surgery. I'm not. It was really a roller coaster. But then when the concussion happened, I had that downtime. And I had gotten into a really good prayer habit by that point. So I prayed, and I just remember several times hearing, you need to pray for other people. And I was like, okay, I don't know if I got it out of what I read in the Bible or, exactly where, but it was during my prayer time. And so I did. I started praying for other people. And it was almost this, you need to pray for others. So like, get out of your own head, get out of
Quit
your own
thinking about yourself.
Suffering. Because I had spent so much time just feeling sad about the fact that, what if I die?
Right.
What if I'm not here for my kids? Like, I don't know what to do with this, and just feeling like, maybe just cheated in a way, because I'd been through all this stuff to then be told, you don't have much time to live.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you do with that? And
right. But the reality is that's all our realities.
It is. Yeah. And
Right.
I had to learn that. Like,
Right.
well, and right, as we talk about me being a palliative care nurse, here I am every day at work, walking people through planning for the end of your life, planning for your own mortality. And then this hits me, and I was like, oh,
I am unprepared for this.
Yeah. And I'm probably, by the world standard, way more prepared for it than the average person.
About it a lot more.
Yep.
Certainly in the last few years. And then with all your experience as a nurse, just being around it. Right?
Yeah. So, so really, all of that came to a head when I kept having this vision of having a prayer box in the front of my house. And going back to my old self a little bit, I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I don't know if that'd really help anybody. Well, maybe I'll just put it in the front of my yard. I don't know. So eventually I told you about it. I told Brian about it. I started telling other people about it. And everyone's like, well, that sounds like a really great idea. And so it became, over time, this ministry of something that helped me through. It helped me pray for others. Yeah. So it's called Takes a Village. And it's a ministry of prayer. And we put out prayer boxes to people can put in front of their homes, businesses, to really help bring people together. Because I learned that when it's not all about you and you're praying for others, I started seeing these really cool things start happening. And I knew they were God things. I knew that they were things that, God had put this on my heart to reach out to other people to get me out of my own negative headspace.
Yep.
And then seeing that there were other people promoting me and helping me to do that too was really powerful. And so, all of that turned into this ministry. And now, we'll have soon 8, prayer boxes out
in this community,
in this area.
Yep. We have one.
Yep.
And I'm on the board.
Yep.
So I got to watch you and Brian and help see this come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
You can scan them.
Yeah.
And each box has its own homepage I pulled it up for a member yesterday.
Okay.
And seeing all the pictures of the families and the people by their boxes, it really gives you a good vision of what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
Because now you do Monday videos where you're talking about prayer, meditation, different routines, different ways to pray, and you're building a community that loves others through this nonprofit in a time that it's more needed than ever.
Yeah.
And is it fair to say that either A, you never would have heard that, or B, your fears would have prevented you from acting on it?
Oh, yeah. I think if I, trying to look at the history or even look at the bright side of having a potential diagnosis like pancreatic cancer, not that I have that right now, but the thoughts of that brought me to the whole ministry.
Yep.
I would have, in my past, let my fears hold me back, for sure, and not listen to God's prompting and other people helping me and prompting me. I would have just said no because of my fear, because of
your own idea of who you are and what other people would think, and maybe not being worthy, having that idea.
Yeah.
And now you're in a leadership position, doing the best you can, humbly, learning, failing, willingly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, humble. That's a big thing. And it was a learning process, still is a learning process for me.
I already know the answer to this question, but has it surprised you to find out over the last year and a half, how many people look at you in admiration and look at you as a leader and have come to you multiple times for things that require that leadership, that strength to be willing to put yourself out there, be vulnerable, which is humble courage, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I've seen that in many instances.
Right?
Yeah, in a lot of ways where people either at church or people I've met through the gym or friendships, family, even online. Yeah, all sorts of places where
you just got invited to another podcast.
Yeah,
by a pastor who saw a prayer box.
Saw one of the boxes.
And was like, this is the coolest thing ever.
So we're going to do that in a couple weeks,
That's
which will be
amazing.
great. Yeah. Well, in that, the conversation there made me realize that he talks about how our stories intersect, how everything meets and works together and is orchestrated in a way. And it was like, oh, that's so cool.
That's your whole story.
That's the whole thing.
That's the whole thing.
And I can choose to look at all these negative things I've been through and say, man, that really is crappy. I'm just so sad that, and just sit in that space. Or I can choose to do something with it and be humble and love other people and pray for other people.
And go on the intended adventure that God has for you.
Yeah. And do with, who knows, whatever time I have left on this earth, because none of us know.
Nope.
And choose to do good things with it and to love other people through it and listen to God. Or I can sit in my own headspace and
convince yourself you're this or you're not this, or, surround yourself with people who self-validate in the same way and, and commiserate, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, God, there was one other question I was going to have. I don't want to go too long. Your story is amazing. I just want to recap because 2 years ago, I met you because your kids were going to come in and do our program.
Yeah.
And now 2 years later, we've seen you start a mission, lose 90 pounds, detox your kids off of technology, grow closer, get Kyle on a BMX team, get Brian into a more leadership role with more peace in his life, for sure.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Massively. He'll probably be in here some other day.
Yeah.
Just talking about that.
Yeah.
We have been absolutely blessed to have been able to come along and grow a friendship and be a part of your mission and a part of your growth. It's been truly, it's one of those things that if I never did anything else with this coaching program, has a ripple effect that is going now, that is so potentially profoundly wonderful that I'm happy.
You'd be good.
I'd be good. How cool is that?
Yeah.
Right? So,
And
anyway,
I'm starting to see that with the ministry.
right.
Of, getting
A
texts
rising
from
tide
people of
lifts all ships.
prayers and just people being like, oh, I was so blessed by this, or I got all these prayer requests, and just, always at the right time.
Right.
When
if you're paying attention.
Yeah, if we're paying attention to it. Yep.
Well,
it's pretty cool.
Well, it's an amazing story, and I truly believe that while you are still going through trouble, there's no way that God would take you out of this adventure right now based on how he's being able to use you and how you're being able to respond.
Yeah.
And I can't say why I know that. I told you that at the first diagnosis.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, there ain't no way.
Oh, yeah, because my fears still come up here and there. Yeah.
There ain't no way. But either way, you'll do it. You'll face it. You're not going to run.
Right.
You're not going to hide anymore. You're going to face it willingly. Your transformation has been truly amazing, and it's had a profound effect on so many people that I'm just so eternally grateful to have had the opportunity to coach, to mentor, to befriend, to continue to come along, support in any way possible, and then also have that reciprocated in my own life because I'm only human. And one of the things that should be noted, because this is a fairy tale story to some degree, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is we suffer daily, weekly. But now you're surrounded with people and with God and the right priority lens with God, family, husband, right?
Yeah.
In the right eternal aim where the unnecessary suffering doesn't need to be there. The suffering that does has a purpose, and you're anticipating what that purpose is,
right?
Which is cool,
yeah,
right? Because, Takes a Village came out of that, right?
Yeah.
And so now you have this understanding of the way God works that you didn't necessarily see before, and it's just so flippin' cool. And so I just want to thank you for A, trusting me, this program, B, doing unbelievably hard work. I mean, that's one of the reasons I charge what I charge. It's like, I want people who are going to do the work.
Yeah.
And how hard was it?
Oh, very hard.
Very
many
hard.
times. Yeah.
Hardest thing maybe you've ever done to some degree.
Yeah.
At some points.
Yeah, at some points for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But with maybe the best rewards you've ever had.
Yep.
Well,
yeah,
that's the way it works.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for being an awesome person, great friend, awesome steward to your responsibility that God's given you. And just thank you for everything.
Thank you. Yeah. I wouldn't be where I am without you and Sarah and, your coaching and just friendship. And yeah, I truly think it was like a divine appointment that I walked in here when I did. And
Indeed.
that, things have changed so much and it's great.
Well, I pray that this podcast blesses other people's hearts so that they can start seeing properly and believing that true transformation is so profoundly impactful in you and your family and the world around you that if it's not me, I don't care if it's my coaching practice. I mean, I don't know where else you'll go, because I really don't know how many people
what's out there.
I don't know what's out there, honestly. I know what we do is unique, but seek it.
Yeah.
Right? Seek that.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, with all your patients, if they could go back, you know what I mean?
They would.
Most
of them would.
They would. Yeah. Because none of that money matters.
Right.
None of those things matter. None of that easy crap, convenient bull crap matters, other than the fact that you're probably suffering and dying now because of it,
right.
To some degree. And it's like, it's so powerful.
It's so powerful. Yeah. You just want to be able to shout that on the rooftops and tell everyone.
100%.
And,
So that's my prayer that these stories, because we're going to have a series of these, that these stories will inspire and convict and validate what's possible. Even though each story is unique,
right,
and each calling is unique, and each fear and trauma set and all those challenges are unique. We have the roadmap. You played it perfectly, and now you get to benefit, and all those around you get to benefit.
Yeah.
And that's just awesome.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's pretty
awesome.
cool.
Well, Kim Steffens, you guys, thank you so much for being you. And thanks for watching Seek First, you guys. And, shameless plug. If this resonates with you, reach out. Truly, it's worth it. And if Takes a Village resonates with you, takesavillagem.com.
Yep.
Or just look for it on Facebook.
Yep.
And reach out. We have scholarships available.
Yep.
If you need them. The boxes aren't that bad, but they're very high quality.
Yeah.
So they do run a few hundred.
Yep.
But you can customize them, and there's a couple of cheaper options.
Yep.
And, and it's a great way for you to say, this is who I am. This is what I believe.
Yeah.
And I'm here for anybody who needs love and support, that sees this, that needs a little manifestation, a little God, a little aim.
Yeah, making it so we're all the church. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're the best.
You too. Thank you.